An old church stood on the outskirts of a small town drowned in thick fog. Its dilapidated appearance, cracked walls, and creaking door created an ominous atmosphere. Time seemed to have bypassed this place, leaving it a prisoner of the past. Locals avoided the church, telling each other legends that strange sounds could be heard here at night. It was quiet. The moon barely broke through the dense clouds, illuminating the narrow path leading to the cemetery behind the church. Three friends, Max, Anya, and Kirill, decided to spend the night in this church to dispel the rumors and prove that all these stories are just fiction. They reached the gate of the cemetery. Max pushed the heavy iron doors open with a rattle. "Here we are," he said, trying to hide his excitement. "I hope you haven't forgotten your lantern?" Anya asked, turning to Kirill. "Of course not. Here it is," Kirill answered, pulling out a powerful flashlight from his backpack. The beam of light cut through the thick darkness, illuminating old tombstones and rows of crooked crosses. They entered the church. The inside was even darker than the outside. The smell of damp and decay hit the nose. Max lit a few candles, probably left by some infrequent visitor. Their flickering light cast bizarre shadows on the walls, where in some places half-abraded frescoes had been preserved. "So, what now?" Kirill asked, looking around. "We just sit and wait for nothing to happen?" "Exactly," replied Anya with a chuckle. "Didn't you want to test your courage?" They settled on the floor, talking and trying to lighten the atmosphere. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a low, faint sound. It came from deep inside the church, where the altar was. Max picked up the candle and headed in the direction of the sound. "Who's there?" he shouted, but his voice echoed off the stone walls. At that moment there was a thud, then another. Kirill shone his flashlight on the altar, and in that second all three of them froze. Something dark began to rise from the floor, right from under the ancient stone slabs. "What the?" Kirill began, but before he could finish, a naked bone covered with decayed skin appeared from the crack. Behind it, another. Max recoiled, dropping the candle. "Run!" Anya shouted, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. The ground beneath his feet shook. Cracks began to spread across the floor, and one by one the dead began to emerge from them. Their empty eye sockets seemed to stare straight into the souls of the three friends. They moved slowly, but inexorably. Outside, Max shouted, looking around in panic. The friends rushed toward the exit, but as soon as they ran out of the church, what they saw made them stop. The cemetery behind the church was coming to life. The ground was bulging, and from there, two figures of dead men were emerging. "We are surrounded," Anya whispered in horror. The dead, uttering muffled snarls, reached for the living. Their pale, twisted bodies shimmered in the moonlight, as if they represented death itself. "Over there," Max pointed to an old chapel at the edge of the cemetery. "Hurry up!" The three friends rushed towards the chapel, hoping it would be their temporary refuge, but it remained unclear whether they would be able to survive this night. When the dead rose, the chapel was small, with a low vaulted ceiling, a musty odor firmly embedded in its walls. Cyril closed the door, pressing his whole body against it. "She won't last long if those things decide to break in," he exhaled, catching his breath. With trembling hands, Anya lit the candle she'd found on the floor. Its dim light barely illuminated the room. In the corner of the chapel stood an old altar, covered with dust and cobwebs. Max walked over to it, hoping to find something that would help them survive. "There's nothing here, just rubble and..." "Wait," he picked up a strange metal object. It was a dagger with symbols engraved on the blade. "What is it?" Anya asked, coming closer. "It looks like some kind of ritual knife," Max suggested. "Maybe it could be used?" "Use against whom? There are too many of them," Kirill objected, glancing at the window. They could already see the dead slowly approaching the chapel. "I've heard something about this place," Anya said, straining her memory. "The locals said that they used to perform rituals to exorcise evil here. Maybe this knife is part of the ritual?" "Then we should try it," Max said firmly. "Better than just sitting around waiting to die." He took the knife and headed down the aisle. Anya and Kirill froze, watching his actions. Max tried to remember the words he had once read in books about ancient rites. He began to mutter something under his breath, moving the knife over the altar. Suddenly the air in the chapel became heavy. The candle flickered as if it were about to be strangled by an invisible force. There was a heartbreaking howl from outside. The dead men, as if sensing a threat, began to move faster. They banged on the door and windows, trying to break in. "Hurry, Max," Anya shouted, clenching her fists. The knife began to glow with a dim blue light. At the same moment, a crack in the chapel floor glowed with the same glow. From there, a thick mist began to rise, wrapped in bizarre patterns. The dead men froze in place as if stopped by an invisible wall. "What's going on?" whispered Kirill, not taking his eyes off what was happening. But it was only the beginning. The fog began to thicken, taking the shape of a huge figure. Its eyes flashed red, and its voice, low and deafening, echoed throughout the chapel. "Who dares to disturb my peace?" Max froze in place, clutching the knife. He realized that this wasn't just a spirit, it was an entity far more powerful than all the dead people outside, and now it depended on his actions to see if they could get out alive. Max swallowed, feeling cold sweat trickle down his back. The thick, heavy air pressed the three of them to the ground, and every sound, even their breathing, echoed in the small chapel. "It was a mistake," Anya whispered, but her words seemed to dissolve into the rumble coming from the mysterious figure. "Who are you?" Max, gathering all his courage, shouted, clutching the dagger tighter. "And what do you want?" The figure leaned closer, and its face, hidden behind a cloud of fog, began to appear. It was an old man with deep wrinkles, his eyes burning with scarlet flames and his voice sounding like thunder in the midst of lightning. "My name is Enoch," the creature said, and each syllable echoed in Max's head like a red-hot spike. "I was the guardian of this place until you fools awakened the curse. Do you want to survive? Then you must finish what you started." "Finish?" Kirill interjected, taking a step back. "What do you mean?" "This knife," Enoch pointed to a dagger that glowed ever brighter, "was designed to hold the dead in their graves. But you are too late. Their hatred and pain are now stronger than the seals. If you want to save yourself, you will have to sacrifice one of you." "What?" Anya looked fearfully at Max and Kirill. "Sacrifice? We can't. We have to find another way." Enoch smirked, his scarlet eyes flashing with renewed vigor. "There is no other way, child. Either you will sacrifice on this altar, or all will perish. The choice is yours." Max stared in horror at the dagger, which seemed now not just a weapon, but the key to salvation, or damnation. Hundreds of thoughts raced through his mind, but before he could say anything, the chapel door shuddered under the blows of the dead, the crack of which filled the room. "We don't have time," Kirill shouted, clutching his head. "Max, do something." Max turned to Anya, who, with eyes full of tears, clutched his hand. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We'll find another way. We'll get out of here together." But everything inside him told him that there was really no more time. In a moment, the dead would rush in. "I'm sorry," he said faintly. Max raised his dagger, but instead of pointing it at one of his friends, he plunged it sharply into the altar. At the same instant there was a rumbling sound, and the figure of Enoch roared with rage. "Fool," he shouted, disappearing in a cloud of red mist. "You have ruined all of you." A crack in the floor began to widen, and a bright light burst out of it with incredible force, blinding all three of them. The last thing Max, Anya, and Kirill heard before the darkness swallowed them up was the howling of the dead turning to agony. When they woke up, it was morning. The sun was shining brightly, and there was no church or cemetery around. They were lying on the grass in the middle of the forest, surrounded by the sounds of nature. "Is it over?" Anya asked quietly, struggling to get up. Max looked around, feeling something heavy in his hand. A dagger. It was intact and didn't seem to glow anymore, but something told him the story wasn't over yet. "Perhaps," he replied, looking away, "but I think we've only just begun to deal with this curse." The three friends walked away from the forest, not looking back, not knowing what lay ahead, but determined never to return to those dark places again. The sun, through sparse clouds, was slowly rising above the horizon, flooding the forest with golden light. Max, Anya, and Kirill, still shaken by the events of the night, wandered along the path, trying not to think about what they had just experienced. But every shadow in the forest, every crack of a branch made them flinch. The dagger, still in Max's hand, remained cold, as if it were absorbing all the energy around it. "Do you think it's really over?" Kirill finally broke the silence, looking back. "I don't know," Max answered quietly, "but something tells me it's not over. The dagger, it's like he wants something from us." Anya stopped and looked at them in disbelief. "We made it out. We're alive. Isn't that enough? Maybe we should just forget about it. Go home and never mention this night again?" "Forget it?" Max turned to her, his voice louder than he'd expected. "How do you suggest we forget? We have awakened something ancient, something that now perhaps wants to return to this world. But we don't know what exactly it was." Kirill interjected. "Maybe we really did complete the ritual. Maybe it really was over." Max looked at the dagger in silence, its blade gleaming in the sunlight. It was still engraved with mysterious symbols that seemed to move as if they were alive. "I'm not sure," he said at last, "but I think we need to figure this out. Something tells me this weapon didn't just fall into our hands." In the afternoon, they reached Anya's house, a small cottage on the outskirts of the town. The house seemed quiet and peaceful, but it was deceptive. They knew that after what they had been through, even the most mundane things could hide a threat. "I think we should take a break first," Anya said, opening the door. "We're all exhausted." Max and Kirill nodded silently, stepping inside. The house was warm and cozy, but the tension between them remained. They spread the cards out on the kitchen table, trying to figure out where they could find answers. If this knife is part of some kind of ritual, then maybe there should be records or books about it somewhere. Max suggested, "Is there a library nearby? Or maybe an archive?" "I doubt the local library has anything like that," Anya replied, pouring herself some water. "But my grandfather once mentioned an old manor near the city. He said that ancient books and records were kept there, but it's been abandoned for a long time." "An abandoned manor house? Sounds like that's where we're going next." Kirill grinned, but his voice sounded nervous. Max only nodded. The manor seemed to be their only hope of finding answers. By late afternoon, they reached the manor. It was a stately but ruined building surrounded by dense forest. The dilapidated roof, broken windows, and vines overgrown walls looked like nature was trying to take over the place. "Are you sure there's something here?" Kirill asked, looking around carefully. "We have to check," Max answered firmly, stepping towards the door. As soon as they entered, the same smell of dampness and decay that had been in the old church was in the air. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and rare rays of moonlight shone through the holes in the roof. Max made his way to the center of the hall, where there was a huge stone table covered in symbols. "Is that an altar?" Anya whispered, staring at the surface of the table in horror. The dagger in Max's hands began to glow with a faint blue light, as if responding to the presence of this place. "There's something here," he said, stepping closer. But before he could say anything, there was a rustle in the far corner of the hall. The three friends froze. The beam of light from Kirill's flashlight slowly crept across the room until it stopped on a tall shadow. It was a figure, tall, curvy, with long arms that almost touched the floor. It didn't move, but its empty eye sockets stared straight at them. "What is it?" Anya whispered, grasping Max's hand. "It seems we're not alone," he replied quietly. The figure took a step forward, its movements unnatural, like broken puppets. A low, wrenching sound came out of its mouth that made the blood freeze in its veins. "Run!" Kirill shouted, but just as they tried to retreat, the door slammed shut behind them. The figure froze, then it raised its hand and pointed directly at Max. "The dagger," the creature wheezed. "Give it back, or pay in blood." Max felt his heart skip a beat. Now they had a choice: give up the dagger, risking awakening more evil, or fight what stood before them, and there was almost no time to think about it. Max gripped the dagger tighter. His hands trembled, but he forced himself not to take his eyes off the dark figure. She continued to stand, arm outstretched as if expecting them to obey. Her empty eye sockets glowed with a faint red light, and from the depths of her throat came wrenching sounds, as if the creature could not speak properly. "What are you?" Max dared to ask, his voice sounding firm despite his inner fear. The figure tilted its head as if studying him, then took another slow step forward. Her voice, deep and rumbling, filled the entire room. "Guardian, guardian of the blade, you do not realize what you carry in your hands. This dagger is not for you, mortal. It is the key, and you are unprepared for what it will unlock. If you are guardian, why do you want to take it away?" Anya interrupted, hiding behind Max, but not taking her eyes off the creature. The creature stopped, lowering its arm. "Because you've already broken the order," it thundered. "The blade holds the boundary between this world and the world of the dead, but you have awakened it. Now the line is thin, and the dead can sense it. If you don't give it back to me, whatever lies beyond will pass into this world. And if we believe you, who's to guarantee that you won't use it for something worse yourself?" Kirill exclaimed, struggling to keep himself from panicking. The guardian was silent, as if pondering. At that moment, Max felt a strange vibration in the dagger. The sensation was almost physical, as if the dagger was speaking to him, though he couldn't hear the words. "We can't just give it away," Max said firmly, glancing at his friends. "This blade brought us here on its own. Then there's a reason it chose us." The Guardian roared, filling the hall at once with a deafening sound. Dust and stone crumbled from somewhere above, and the air became heavy with breath. "You are playing with forces you do not understand," he bellowed, his voice rumbling like a clap of thunder. "I'm giving you one last chance. Either the blade is returned to me, or you will learn what it means to be damned forever." Max, Anya, and Kirill looked at each other. Time was running out, and the decision had to be made now. "We can't trust him," Anya whispered. "It's all too strange." "But if he's right," Kirill objected, "we could ruin everything if we do something wrong." Max took a deep breath. Something inside him told him that the Guardian was telling only part of the truth. Perhaps the blade was indeed the key, but the question was where it opened the door. Max felt that the fate of their world now depended on his next move. "We have a choice," he finally said, looking directly at the Guardian. "We keep this blade. We will find a way to fix this on our own. And if you try to stop us, I will use it against you." The Guardian straightened abruptly, and his eyes flashed blood red. "You have made your choice, mortal, and now you are all destined to experience the wrath of the frontier." With those words, the figure vanished into the thick black smoke that filled the hall. From somewhere in the depths of the manor came a grinding and loud cracking sound, as if the walls of the building were beginning to collapse. "Hurry," Max shouted, grabbing Anya's arm. "We have to leave." They ran to the door, but as soon as Kirill tried to open it, the door was locked. The smoke thickened, and dark, indistinct figures began to emerge in its puffs. They moved, extending long arms toward their friends, like shadows of the dead that the Guardian had released from another world. "What now?" Kirill shouted, looking around for a way out. Max looked at the dagger. It flashed with a bright blue light that illuminated the entire room. Max felt words pop into his head that he couldn't remember before. It was an ancient language, but it was as if he could understand it. "Hold them back," he shouted to his friends, heading for the altar. He stood before the stone table, raised his dagger, and began to speak the words that sounded in his head. The light of the dagger became so bright that it was blinding. Anya and Kirill, taking some metal candlesticks from the table, tried to ward off the shadows that were getting closer and closer to them. Their figures became more and more real. Empty eye sockets and bones began to show through the smoke. "Max, hurry," shouted Anya, fighting off one of the ghosts that had almost grabbed her. Suddenly the light of the dagger became so bright that everything around them lit up blue. The ghosts howled and the smoke began to dissipate. The Guardian reappeared, but now he looked different. His figure was twisted, and his voice was quieter but more threatening. "You don't realize what you've done," he whispered. Without stopping, Max plunged the dagger straight into the altar. The floor beneath them shook, and a round portal opened in the center of the hall. Surrounded by blue light, wind began to rush out of it, sucking everything around them in. Ghosts and smoke disappeared, being drawn into the portal. "Hold on," Max shouted, trying to hold his ground. The Guardian, casting one last baleful glance, was also pulled into the portal, which began to close a second later. As soon as he disappeared, silence filled the hall. Everything around them froze. When the friends left the manor, the sky was clear and the air was fresh. Tired but alive, they looked at each other. "Is this the end?" Anya asked, still breathing heavily. Max looked at the dagger, which was now black and tarnished, stripped of its power. "I think so, or at least for a while," he replied. They moved away from the manor, toward a new day, but with the feeling that they had only the first chapter of a much worse story behind them. It had been a week since Max, Anya, and Kirill had left the cursed manor. They decided not to tell anyone about what had happened. Everything in the city remained as before, and it seemed that the events of that night had left no trace, but each of them felt that the story was not over. Max kept the dagger in a wooden box hidden under his bed. It no longer glowed and looked like a plain old object covered in rust. But every night Max had nightmares. He saw the Guardian, the cracks in the ground through which the dead were rising, and heard those strange words spoken in the manor. Sometimes he even felt the dagger as if it were calling to him, whispering something he couldn't understand. "Max, you look awful," Anya said, coming into his house. "Are you sleeping at all?" "Not really," he answered, lifting a tired gaze to her. "These dreams, they don't stop." Every time I close my eyes, I think I'm still in that chapel or the manor. Anya sat down across from him and sighed quietly. You're not the only one with problems, she admitted. I have nightmares, too, but it's not just that. I feel like something's near me. Sometimes it feels like someone's watching me, even when I'm alone. Max frowned. He was about to say something when there was a knock on the door. It was Kirill, who looked even worse than both of them. Guys, I don't know how to explain it, but I think we've made a mess. What happened? Max asked, getting up. Kirill looked around, as if checking that no one was following them. Then he pulled a small piece of paper out of his bag. Yesterday, I ran into an old woman at the market. She just came up to me and slipped this to me, saying, give it to the people who were at the manor. Max unfolded the paper. It was a map with another mysterious object marked on it, a circle with symbols similar to those engraved on the dagger. What does it mean? Anya asked, looking over her shoulder. I don't know, but I think it has something to do with the dagger. Kirill answered, perhaps it's the place where it was created, or where we can find answers. The next day, the three friends followed the map. It led them outside the city, to an old stone quarry that no one remembered anymore. The road was long and difficult, but as they approached the place, it became clear that the map was not deceiving them. In the center of the quarry was a huge round stone, all modeled with ancient symbols. Max pulled out his dagger, which immediately began to emit a faint glow. I think we're here, Anya whispered. But before they could get closer, the ground began to shake. A thick black mist began to rise from the cracks, as if in response to the presence of the dagger. It swiftly enveloped the stone, forming the shape of something huge. It's them again, Kirill muttered, backing away. The mist gathered into a figure that looked like a guardian, but this entity was larger, its eyes burning like two red suns. A rumbling voice echoed throughout the quarry. You have broken the seal. Now you must finish what you started. Max took a step forward, raising his dagger. We have come to set things right, he shouted. Tell us what we need to do. The figure laughed, and its laughter was like the cracking of ripping cloth. Fix it? You are but puppets used by forces stronger than you. You think you can stop the awakening? Awakening? Anya interjected. What are you talking about? The figure began to approach, its shadow casting a chill that chilled to the bone. This blade is not just a key, the creature said. It is part of an ancient ritual that was meant to keep the ancients beyond the worlds. But you broke the seals. Now the boundary has weakened, and if you don't finish what you started, they will enter your world. And how do we stop it? Max shouted. The seals must be restored, the creature replied, its voice growing louder. To do that, a final sacrifice must be made, a sacrifice that will bind you to this dagger forever. A sacrifice? Anya took a step back. What do you mean? The figure stared at them, its red eyes flashing. One of you must stay here, stay to become a guardian. Only then can the balance be restored. Silence hung over the quarry. Max, Anya, and Kirill looked over to each other. It was a choice none of them wanted to make, but they realized there was no turning back. If they left, the ancient evil would indeed break out into their world. I'll stay, Max said suddenly. What? Anya grabbed his arm. You can't. We'll find another way. We already tried to find another way, he answered, looking into her eyes. If I don't do this, we're all going to die. I have to undo what I started. Kirill was silent, his face a mixture of horror and helplessness. Max walked over to the stone circle and stood in its center. The dagger in his hands began to glow brighter than ever. The figure smiled. You made the right choice, mortal, the creature said before vanishing into thin air. The circle began to glow, and Max felt a chill creep into his body. He looked at Anya and Kirill, who were standing at the edge of the circle. Take care of each other, he said before his voice dissolved along with the bright flash of light. When it was over, Max was gone. The stone circle darkened and the dagger was gone. Anya fell to her knees, unable to believe what was happening. Kirill hugged her silently, looking at the bleak but now empty quarry. Max had become the new guardian, and now he would forever be the link between the worlds. 10 years had passed. The town where it all once began has long since changed. New houses grew in place of the old buildings, and the cemetery behind the church became abandoned and overgrown with thick grass. No one talked about strange sounds or the dead coming back to life anymore. The legends associated with that place were forgotten, giving way to other stories that the locals liked to tell. Anya and Kirill never went back there. They left town a few months after Max disappeared. Neither of them wanted to see the old church, the homestead, or the quarry again. They tried to start a new life, but the memory of those events stayed with them forever. Anya got a job at the History Museum, where she tried to find answers to the questions that had tormented her for years. She studied ancient rituals and legends associated with other worlds, hoping to somehow understand what happened to Max. But all she found were scraps, hints, and no clear answers. Kirill, on the other hand, decided to distance himself from the past. He moved to another city, found a job in IT, and tried to live a normal life. But at night he was still haunted by nightmares. He saw Max alone, standing in the middle of boundless darkness, guarding the world from something ancient and terrible. One fall night, Anya received a strange letter. It lay at her door, without a return address, written in a familiar handwriting. On the envelope was one word: help. Inside was a piece of paper covered with the same symbols that were on the dagger. Anya immediately realized who could have sent it. Max, she whispered. She immediately called Kirill, who at first thought she had lost her mind. "It's impossible," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. He disappeared. We've seen it. How can he write letters?" "I don't know," Anya replied. "But what if he's still alive? What if he's out there somewhere, trying to reach us?" After much doubt, they decided to meet again. Though both of them were shaking with fear, they went back to the very town where it had all started. When they reached the quarry, everything looked different. The stone circle that had been dark and lifeless that night was now glowing with a faint bluish light. Anya felt a chill run down her skin. "He's here," she said. "Are you sure?" Kirill shone the flashlight on the circle, but saw nothing. Anya stepped closer, and the moment she touched the circle with her hand, the space around them shook. For a moment they were in absolute silence. Then the air split, and Max appeared right in front of them. He looked different. His eyes glowed with a faint blue light, and the same symbols that had been on the dagger were showing through on his forehead. Max's clothes were tattered, and his voice sounded low and echoing. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, looking at them. "Max!" Anya screamed, rushing towards him, but something invisible held her back. "You're alive. We can help you get out." "No," Max answered firmly. "I'm part of this world. I can't go back anymore." "Then why did you send the letter?" Kirill asked, his voice trembling. "You were calling for us." Max looked at them, a mixture of pain and hope in his gaze. "The border is collapsing again," he said. "Their power is growing. I need your help to close it completely, but if you come with me, you will never come back." Anya and Kirill looked at each other, their hearts clenched with terror, but they knew that if they left now, they would never be able to live in peace. "We'll do it together," Anya said. "We won't leave you." "Are you sure?" Max asked, his glowing eyes lingering on Kirill. Kirill took a deep breath and nodded. "We won't let it happen again." Max held out his hands, and blue light surrounded them. They felt everything around them disappear: sound, light, even the sense of time. The world dissolved, and the three of them stepped into the void. They disappeared forever. No one in town ever heard from Max, Anya, and Kirill again. But on the night when the moon is at its fullest, people still say they see a strange blue light in the old quarry. Maybe it's just a legend, or maybe it's a reminder of those who sacrificed everything to keep evil beyond our world. And the world went on living, unaware that those who were willing to give everything were fighting for it.